Come on in. We have some more guests. And what I want to do this afternoon is share some stories about climbing entrepreneurial summits or revenue summits. And I do think climbing summits, and I remember one summer I went with my wife Stacy to Colorado, and we were climbing Mount Princeton. It's a 14,000 foot peak just south of Aspen. And I remember, well, it's a long climb. It was about 6,000 feet, but I think we got up about 3,000 or 4,000 feet through the trees, and all of a sudden, there was this rubble field of rocks, and you couldn't really see the path anymore. And frankly, especially my wife and myself a little, we started getting scared. Wow, are all these rocks going to start rolling? It was kind of from an old glacier. And I think we were going through the rock field for a couple hours. You couldn't really see the trail anymore. And we were getting, I don't know, maybe 1,000 feet from the summit, and all of a sudden it started getting cloudy and felt like storms were coming in. And I wanted to keep going, but luckily my wife was smarter and said, hey, we got to turn around. So it was a pretty scary journey, and I think a lot of my experience as an entrepreneur has been similar, where sometimes climbing the summit it starts to feel very lonely, start to feel very scared, and not sure if you should turn back or keep going. And but then, if you do keep going and you get there, it can feel quite amazing. And I think that's the high and low of building companies that I love. I'm building my third company now. Our first company was called BigMachines. And I often got calls from metal scrap dealers saying, hey, do you have any scrap metal? But we actually didn't sell BigMachines, we sold software. It's configure, price, quote software. And it was a long journey I'll tell you about, but after about 13 years, it was bought by Oracle. But it was a very long journey. Our next company, SteelBrick, I was actually only there for 2 years. It got bought by Salesforce. Then I spent 5 quarters at Salesforce, learning a lot about how they've built their revenue engine. And then the last 8 months now, I've been back at G2 Crowd. And my journey as an entrepreneur started way back in 1988. And I was drawn to California by this beautiful scene. And I was born in Germany, grew up there, then in Pittsburgh, which were very dreary places. And I remember the first time I came to Stanford, I saw this. I'm like, wow, I want to go to school here. But the first time I applied, they said no. When I applied as an undergrad, and I remember that feeling still of getting the small letter. But I remember saying at the time, wow, I'll try to go to business school there. And luckily, the second time it worked out. And also, when I got to Stanford, this was the dot-com era. Do any of you remember that? Yes, none of the millennials on our team do. But it was kind of an exciting time where, the first internet boom. And I got involved with a startup at Stanford and 2 computer science students. And I always say, too bad it wasn't Larry and Sergey. It was 2 other students. They were doing something much more mundane. They were building time and expense software, so a startup called Alianza. And frankly, we didn't know how to sell. We did end up selling it, luckily, to an entrepreneur that did. This guy, Farzad Dabachi, Niku, he went public. And but I think the one thing I didn't learn at business school, the tuition was very expensive. But one class I did not have, we learned strategy, we learned marketing, finance. One thing we didn't learn was selling. And frankly, I think at the time, most professors thought selling is kind of a dirty thing. And then I really had to learn selling the hard way, and I wound up getting a much more expensive MBA in the real world. And in 1999, I went back home to Pittsburgh, where I grew up. So I am a Steelers fan. And the idea for my first company really came from my father's business. He was running a pump manufacturing company that my grandfather had started after World War II in Germany called Abel pumps. And he sold these pretty complicated pumps. You can see a picture of it there. And I was talking about the internet in 1999. I said, Dad, how's the internet going to affect your business? And he just looked at me and said, it's not. I said, what do you mean? Because obviously in the Valley, and at the time everyone was talking about getting Amazoned. Funny, we're still talking about that 20 years later. But he explained to me, look, my pumps aren't like books. I can't just put them on a website and have somebody buy it. They're very engineered. I have German sales engineers that will custom configure the pump based on pressure, flow rate, viscosity, and there's no way I can sell it online. But I saw at the time Dell, they were really the pioneer in this world, Michael Dell, and I think he was a hero of the 1990s, but he'd figured out how do you sell highly configurable PCs online and made that a massive business. And that was the basic idea. I said, Dad, I've got this. We'll just sell your pumps like Dell. It'll be easy. It'll be awesome. You'll go direct to your customers. You'll disrupt all your channels, and we'll get it done in 6 months. And so this is the first business plan actually I wrote with my father at his golf club. It was actually a reservation card. And we came up with a name. Actually, his friend David Scully was the president of Heinz Ketchup. We went to his house to brainstorm. And somehow BigMachines URL was available because we said, hey, we're going to sell these BigMachines online. And so we had a name. And then the other thing, David said, I've got this brother, John Scully, who was also famous and infamous in the 80s and 90s. He's the guy that fired Steve Jobs. But later he got fired himself. But he was still a very famous man, and he was investing in B2B e-commerce companies. He had a fund called Scully Brothers. And so David said, hey, go to New York, see my brother John. So I did that, I remember, just before Christmas. And John heard our pitch, and it wasn't much more than this napkin. It was just PowerPoint, but he said, yes, I'll invest. It was .com. It's like, you seem like a smart, clueless kid, and the idea doesn't seem bad. And then the other investor was my father. And then I remember when we started in January 2000, John Scully came out here to the Valley, and he just said, hey, just think about how you go public in a year. I'm like, wow, that sounds amazing. I was like 27. I'm like, this will be really fun. It'll be easy. We'll make lots of money, and my dad will sell his pumps online. But then reality set in. So in the first year, we hired up to like 70 people, raised a bunch of money, and then at the end of 2000, I'm like, great, I'll go raise my next round. And obviously by then, the bubble had burst, and frankly, no one was investing. And I remember Christmas that year, I had to ask my father for a loan just to make payroll. We were pretty much out of money. And then luckily, I found an investor out here, a new investor, Robert Smith, at a firm called Vista Equity, which later changed. But they gave us enough money to really try to go for it. But frankly, then things just got worse. I remember 2001, 2002, we only sold 2 customers. I think my business plan was to sell 50, then 100. And so by 2003, we were pretty much bankrupt. And it was very painful. We scaled the company down from 70 to 20 people. And then we decided, hey, the only way we can build this business, we have to go organic growth. We'll never be able to raise more money, and we have to figure out how do we make money from customers. So I had to learn how to sell. And so I always say that was about a $25 million MBA. And but then I'm finally like, oh, I just have to sell stuff. And then the other fortunate, and really that was kind of the low point probably of my life, where I remember, I was about to lose all my dad's money. We were about to go bankrupt. And I remember about the same time, my wife and I, we had our first kid. I thought kid, it turned out to kids, twins. But I remember they were born 9 weeks premature. And so I remember there was a day I was driving to the hospital, and we'd moved to Chicago to save money, where I'm like, man, my life can't get any worse. My boys are in the NICU, my business is going bankrupt, and I don't really know what to do. And but luckily from there, things somehow started getting better. We persevered. And really a big turning point was I met Matt Gorniak. And I hired him at the time. I only had 1 salesperson, and I tried to hire 2 VPs of sales from very experienced enterprise software companies. And frankly, it was way too early to hire a VP anyway. There was no market. And secondly, to sell for a startup is very different. They came from big enterprise software companies. And obviously the big problem as a startup, any of you that start a company, is always like, big who? Why are you calling me? You're a .com? When are you going bankrupt? So needless to say, it was very hard to sell. But then I met Matt, and he really became my best friend and business partner as we kind of together just figured out, hey, how do we sell? And we really just started doing it 1 deal at a time. And then the other good fortune I had, around the same time, we started partnering with Salesforce. And I met Mark Benioff, and his business had just gone public. And the basic idea was, hey, Mark, a lot of your customers, especially as you get bigger customers, they might need configurators because you're starting to displace Siebel, and we have one. It's online. It's on demand. Let's partner. And it took a couple years to start working, but eventually, thanks to Salesforce popularizing the cloud, and we became the preferred partner, the business really started to work. And so a few years later, by 2011, we'd scaled the business, and we actually decided to do a recap because it's been over 10 years. We sold 51% to a private equity firm. And then after a couple quarters, I realized it wasn't great working for them, so I kind of stepped out of the business. But it turned out great. We wound up selling it to Oracle a couple years later. And but then I remember after I stepped out, I was lucky. I had we had this beautiful house in Lake Forest in Chicago, but I was kind of at home with my kids at the time and my wife. But really, I kind of felt depressed. Like I wasn't waking up in the morning when my kids were going to school, and my wife's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I kind of wallowed in it for a couple months, and then I kind of realized, wow, I like building companies, and while it's a tremendous struggle, it's ultimately, I really missed my team, I missed Matt, I missed everybody else. So kind of decided, hey, let's do it again. And the idea we then had in 2012 was coming out of our experience at BigMachines. I remember it took us 9 years just to get in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And so as an entrepreneur, I was very frustrated. It was very hard to get validation for a new product and a new technology. And we just decided there's a better way to do this. And the way I started the second company was with 4 of really the best people I'd built the first company with, including Matt. Our CTO, Mike, was our best young engineer. Tim was our head of product. And Mark was our head of design. And so we decided to do this. And the idea, as I mentioned, was, hey, let's take the magic out of enterprise software. And I'm sure you've all heard of a magic quadrant. But to me, I'm always like, what's the magic? The analyst kind of moves you 1 millimeter based on I don't know what. And we said, wow, there's a much better way. In our consumer lives by then, we all use reviews on Amazon. Glassdoor was starting to come up to give employees insights. And we said, hey, let's do the same thing for our industry and make it much easier for customers to buy. Although the scary thing, I remember when we started, we really had no idea how we were going to make money. But we just decided, hey, someone is going to build this, and we'll figure something out, and maybe we'll be like TripAdvisor, but we really didn't know. And then, frankly, it turned into a bit of a struggle, I think. But so by 2014, we decided, hey, let's get involved in another company. And we started building this company, SteelBrick, in parallel. And really, SteelBrick had been started by Max Rudman, whom you can see up here. He was a brilliant engineer and founder out here in Palo Alto. And he'd been building, and after my first company was bought by Oracle, he was really doing the same thing, but next generation, all on Salesforce. And I saw his product, I'm like, wow, this would be much better for Salesforce customers. And Max was struggling to raise money and figure out how to build a revenue engine. And so he and I decided to get together. And the basic idea was, hey, his product plus our revenue team plus capital, we can build a good company. Although we were way behind, there was another company in our space that already raised a ton of money, was way ahead of us, but we just decided, hey, let's do it. So we pulled the team together. Over 100 people joined us out of Oracle. So same team, the best people, luckily. And we really went after a narrow market. We focused on Salesforce. This was us at Dreamforce. And obviously, Salesforce provided a great ecosystem. And I think the one thing across now all 3 companies that is the same is the culture. And we have built very much a family across the 3 companies. And yeah, when we talk, it's an entrepreneurial family. So it is performance-based. We always said, hey, if you're the drunk uncle, you do get kicked out of dinner. But at the core of it, really also what Max had was a lot of heart. And I remember when I was thinking about investing, I actually had him write reviews on G2 Crowd. But the one thing all his customers said, Max really cares. And I can feel that in the product. And when I have a request, he'll call me back at night, and if I have a problem, he'll fix it. And really having that heart and that caring. And then I found this great framework from Chip Conley. He built a hotel chain here called Joie de Vivre, but he wrote this book called Peak, and applying Maslow to businesses and cultures. And but it all starts with heart at the center. But his whole point is, hey, for your customers, if you don't just meet their expectations, but if like Max, at midnight you're supported their case, and by 6 a.m. you've delivered new code, now you've really exceeded their expectations. You've really met unexpected needs, and your customers become evangelists. And same thing with your employees. Obviously, the base level, everyone needs to make money. I think the next level is they get recognition, but I think the ultimate level, they see meaning in their work. And so they really believe that the company is making the world better. They really believe it's making their life better. And the same thing with investors, where not only are they getting a great return, but they're really proud of the company, and they're genuinely evangelizing for you. And if you put all of that together, then I think it can create a lot of joy, and ultimately it can create winning companies. And then we did start the basics. I remember 2014 when we got there, in the middle of the year, Matt got there. They only had 2 sales reps. And frankly, that year we only booked about $2.5 million, but we did set up systems. And frankly, I'm not going to talk about that. Everyone else today did a great job of that, the systems, the metrics. But we had a playbook, we put in our systems, and we kind of built a foundation. But the big thing I think we built was the team. And I think, the second time we were fortunate that, we hired about 1,000 people at, say, BigMachines, and then we were able to kind of bring the best 100, including all of our best salespeople, and just bring everyone back together. And that was a lot of fun and a lot of joy. And this was our scope, but you can see a lot of smiling faces. But everyone was working really hard and really believed. And so we were able to, really come kind of away from behind our market where we were a smaller player. But I remember our partnership with Salesforce was accelerating. They'd invested in a couple of our rounds. But then I remember in 2016, I'd asked a partner team, hey, I want to be able to brief Mark Benioff. And so they said, okay. Finally, I got a date to go out to his house in Seacliff, where he has a home office. But I remember he actually has a big boardroom there overlooking, the bay, or actually more out to the ocean, Land's End, amazing place. And then I remember I had a 12-slide partner pitch prepared for him. But it was, I got 2 slides in talking about our customers, our revenue, and then he's like, oh, just show me the demo, like right now. And so I showed him our demo and showed him, how you could go quote to cash all in Salesforce. And I remember 31 meeting, he turned to John Smorjai, who's there. He's like, oh, I think I want to buy the company. And so that happened very quickly. And initially I said, hey, that's not really what we're looking for. We just raised all this money. But I think he was very convincing. And obviously, as a partner so tied to them, it just made sense for us and the customers. And then we did also very rapid integration. I think by 2 years ago, we became a Salesforce product, now called Salesforce CPQ. And what was amazing about that ride, I think the first company, BigMachines, it took us probably 14, 15 years to go from 1 to 100 million. I think the second time, it took 4 years to go from 1 to over 100 million ARR. And so it was really fun and rewarding just to do it again, but do it a lot better. And now back to G2 Crowd. So I kind of had the luxury. I focused on SteelBrick for a couple of years. I was just on the board of G2 Crowd. But frankly, my co-founders did a great job. And all of a sudden, that company started really growing. And now I think we're getting about 1.5 million software buyers a month. And they'd also scaled it to about, we've also scaled the company out to about 1,000 customers. And so last year, Excel also came to us and said, wow, they started seeing it in all their portfolio companies in terms of entrepreneurs pitching them, using our reviews for validation. And we had a partnership with LinkedIn where we use there for validation, but they kind of came to us and said, hey, we think this could be much bigger. And so I decided, oh, let's leave Salesforce and go back to this. So entrepreneurship, ultimately for me, is a lot more fun. And I think what's been exciting, we're already working with many of you here, so some of the sponsors, but I think for entrepreneurs like Amit from Gong, I don't know if he's in the room, but really what we wanted to build, and Gong just launched this product maybe 1 to 2 years ago, but now they already have hundreds of customer reviews validating that their solution really works. And that was exactly what we wanted, that an entrepreneur didn't have to wait 9 years for Gartner. They could have 10 happy customers that are on our platform. And it's a freemium model. You can be listed for free. But so that entrepreneurs, once they have a good product, they have 10 happy customers, they can be in the game with us. They can be in our grids, and they can get third-party validation. And obviously now, today, we also work with a lot of great growth companies, like Eric Wan at Zoom. He loves talking about delivering happiness, and he uses G2 Crowd to validate it. And most recently, I think we're also really excited that big enterprises are also starting to realize customer voice really matters, and starting to take advantage of our platform to give them that customer validation as well. And I think what's been consistent is really building that culture and the sales team. And here you can see some of our team. I think Olivier might be here, but he did a great job. He joined us about 2 or 3 years ago, and at the time, we had very few customers, but he's done a great job building that revenue engine. And so now it's kind of fun to start seeing that come together. But what have we learned while we're building these companies? What makes how do you build a winning team and revenue engine? And actually, I was talking to Matt Gorniak about this last night, but we came up with kind of 3 key themes based on our experience. I think number 1, you need a story everyone believes in. And I think Eric Wan, whom I just mentioned, with Zoom, he built WebEx before. He was a lead engineer. And when he started Zoom, he got frustrated because of Cisco. They weren't allowing him to engineer the product the way he wanted. But he also recognized web meetings were just too frustrating. We've all seen it, right, where you spend 5 minutes trying to get on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is the slide working? And I think now his slogan is delivering happiness. And he has about now 3,000 reviews validating it. But I think that's the story of the company. And he really lives it, believes it. His whole team believes it. The other thing is building that winning team, and I think you all know this, but I think it's hard to do. It's easy to say, but how do you actually build a great team? And finally, having a playbook, and certainly while I was at Salesforce, and they have a very famous sales playbook, originally Dave Rudnitsky created, and I think you can look it up online. I do think it's a great playbook. And obviously there's many playbooks, Jocko and others were talking about different methodologies, but I think having a playbook the whole team believes in and uses is critical. And on each of those, I think in terms of the story, and having been a partner for years, I do think there's no one better, at least in enterprise, than Mark Benioff. And frankly, he started out doing something arguably very boring, Salesforce automation software. I mean, to be honest, that's very boring, right? It's not exciting. But he's always, and he talks about building narratives, and he always creates a bigger story. And I think a lot of it starts with, hey, Salesforce isn't just a company. He says the business of business is improving the state of the world. And with his 111 Foundation and many of the things he evangelizes for, equality, his employees really believe that Salesforce is about more than just making money and building a company. And I think his narrative for his customers has been, hey, it's not just SFA, it's not just CRM, but you can connect to your customers in a whole new way. So it can really change the customer experience. And a little bit more about creating stories, and I don't think it's easy. Like I said, I think Mark Benioff, Eric Wan, they're amazing at it. I think we're still working on it. But I do think the patterns we've seen also ride bigger waves. And certainly, you look at Salesforce, the bigger wave has been the cloud for many years now. I think the last couple of years, the bigger wave is AI. So Mark creates Einstein. And so I think tying your story to a bigger wave and tying it in a way that your customers can connect to it, I think is critical. And I think the other thing important for your whole sales team is that they connect to that story and they tell it in their own way. But everyone believes and everyone can tell the story in their own way. And I think also one thing they still do at Salesforce, I mean, all 30,000 employees every year have to learn the company's whole presentation and narrative. And so they do, I think, an amazing job for a company at their scale, having everyone believe and know the story. And I think the other things, don't do, and a lot of people tend to do this, just start with kind of boring features, functions. We've all seen boring demos. Sometimes at sales kickoff, we'll have a vendor come in or two vendors come in to demo, just to salespeople to feel how boring it often is. And I think the other thing I learned the hard way at BigMachines, like I said, I thought we were going to change that industry in 6 months. And frankly, 18 years later, we still haven't achieved what I thought we would do in 6 months. And in terms of team building, I do think, actually going back to John Scully, my first investor, but I think he was right about this, that Steve Jobs was probably the best recruiter ever. And I think how was he able to do that? He just believed so much in his own story and what Apple was doing that he couldn't understand why anyone wouldn't want to join. And actually my neighbor in Palo Alto was the CFO of Pixar. And frankly, Steve recruited him when Pixar was kind of failing, Apple was failing. And he was, I think, a very successful attorney at Wilson Sonsini, but he was still able to convince him it's going to be amazing. And I think having that belief and then finding the right person for the job, and it's obviously something I'm still working on, but I think having that mindset is critical. And I think the other thing is about building a team, and ultimately, like I said, we've built a family now over 18 years where everyone really believes in each other, and it's amazing. I think where we can, I think, very easily have people follow us to another company. And the other thing, even when I don't know somebody already, I mean, I do believe in not using recruiters. Like our whole experience at SteelBrick, we went from 5 to 200 people, didn't hire a single person from a recruiter. It was all from our networks, either people following us, or if we didn't know them already, we would find the person we wanted via LinkedIn and we'd call them and we'd get them on board. And I think, and the other thing obviously now is so easy to do is use blind references, right? Use it on LinkedIn. If you don't know them, you got to back channel. I think most people know this, but I think most people don't do it. And the other thing I learned the hard way, like I said, I had 2 VPs of sales that I thought were going to be magical. And I think that's also unfair. As a founder, you got to learn how to sell yourself. And secondly, no one, if your business isn't working, like no one VP of sales is going to fix that. Although I think it's the hardest job in the world to be the VP of sales, because frankly, I think also a lot of VCs, business isn't working, let's just shoot the VP of sales and try another one, right? Because maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't know. So it's tough. And the other thing, hard thing in hiring, obviously if you are a smaller growth company, we learned this the hard way, hey, just because somebody was great at Oracle, doesn't mean they're going to be great for your startup. because when you call them like G2 who, what? It's very different from like, oh yeah, you're from Salesforce, got it, you know? So those were some of our lessons learned. And the other thing is have a playbook. And Peyton Manning, I think as a football fan, although I'm a Steelers fan, but I did admire him, just his ability to audible. And everyone's like, why can he do that, right? And his coach, Tony Dungy, what he said is and here's Marvin Harrison, I think they has a combination, they have the most touchdowns, you know, between a quarterback and a receiver. But I think the reason you could always audible is they just practice the plays ad nauseum. And we try to have our sales reps do the same thing. You just got to know your demo and your sleep. You got to know your slide, your story, so you can audible. You can read the room, pick the right part of the demo, tell the right story, but you can only do it if it's second nature to you. And especially as a team, if you're all dialed in, you know, and Matt and I, we've been selling together 20 years now. I know he's going to say, he knows what I'm going to say. We can say the right thing at the right time because we know we just have it all down. And again, it's easy to do, and I think Jocko turned about training, but it's hard to actually get a whole team to play by it. And I think the other thing also at Salesforce, they always say, one of their rules was, hey, never go in alone. You know, always team sell. And I think the other thing I learned the hard way, like for 3 years, I'm like, oh, you know, I didn't really myself take responsibility for sales. But I also think, you know, as a good Salesforce, Mark Benioff still does this. Like when they're signing up Amazon, he flies and sees Bezos himself. And obviously as a leader, CRO, VP of sales, you are in the best position to sell yourself. And frankly, nothing motivates your team. Obviously teaching them theory, teaching them process, whatever. But hey, let me go to the meeting with you and help you close it. Now you have belief in your team. And now what have I learned as a leader? And I think it took me until I was 40 to learn this. And I think I'm a man, and I have a daughter and boys, and I think women tend to mature faster. But I think I didn't really emotionally mature until I was 40, and maybe I'm not mature yet. I'm 46 now. But I think the big thing also, you know, building these companies is hard. It's a long journey. So I think really learning to take care of yourself. And I do try to, you know, go running every morning and do some breathing, some stretching. But I think there's nothing like taking care of yourself to put yourself in a position to lead. The second thing, and this is my daughter Maddie, but being authentic. And I think in life, it makes life rich, and it makes life fun, but it also works. And even with a customer, right, if you have a problem, like just tell them you got a problem. Or if a sales rep's not performing, you just got to tell them. It's hard to do, but I think if you're authentic, then it's fun and it works. And my daughter is the best in the world at it. She just is, and she's wonderful. And finally, just breathe. Feels good and brings you back to the present moment. So thank you all, and enjoyed getting to be with you, and I will be around for cocktails, but thank you all for being here and hope to meet some of you over a drink.